We're going to talk about how we can use standard form to graph linear equations. So just a reminder, standard form of an equation is where we have x and y on the same side and then all of our constants are on the other side. So if we have our x and y on the same side, remember we said that these coefficients, they don't tell us a lot about the graph. So we're going to look at how we can graph it even though the information isn't given to us outright. So the useful thing that we can find whenever we have our standard form is that we can use it to find our x and y intercepts. So on a graph, your x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis, and anytime you're on the x-axis, your y value is 0. So if I want to figure out what the x-intercept is, I'm going to try to figure out what x is when y is 0. If I want my y-intercept, that's on my y-axis, and everywhere on the y-axis has an x value of 0. So whenever I want the y-intercept, I'm going to ask myself, what is y if x is 0? So to look at an example of this, here we have a graph. And right now we just want to figure out what intercepts are and to figure out which intercept is where. So if we want to fill this one out, we're going to look at the graph. So if I want my x-axis, my x-intercept, that's on my x-axis. So that point is right here. So if I want to figure out what that value is, I want to find what the x point is here. So my x value is going to be 3, and then since it's on the x-axis, my y value is 0. I don't go up or down any. So my x-intercept is here at 3 on the graph. So to write that as a point, I'm going to write that as 3, 0. And remember that coordinates go in parentheses. So for my y-intercept, since it's a y-intercept, I'm going to go to my y-axis and see where the line crosses there. And that crosses here. So my y-intercept, the y-coordinate here is at -1, but it's on the y-axis, so my x value is 0. That one has no left or right. So to write my y-intercept, my x value is 0, my y value is -1. So from a graph, whichever intercept you're looking for, look on that axis, so the x-axis or the y-axis, and then find the point. So for our your turn question, pause the video and look on the graph to figure out what the x and y intercept are. For the x-intercept of this graph, on the x-axis, this line crosses at -4, so to write the coordinate, my x value is -4 and my y value will be 0. For my y-intercept on the y-axis, it crosses at -2. So since it's on the y-axis, my x is 0 and my y value is -2. Next, we're going to look at an equation. So if we have an equation like 8x plus 4y equals 16. So if I have an equation and I want to figure out what my x and y intercepts are, I'm going to use that thought of what the other variable is. So for this first one, if I want my x-intercept, I'm going to figure out what x will be when y is 0, so that I'm on that x-axis. So in my equation, I'm going to leave the x, but I'm going to plug in 0 for the y. And whenever I do that, my y value goes away. So I'm left with 8x equals 16. So I can really cover up my y value and figure out what I would need to make 8x equals 16. So I'll divide each side by 8. And whenever I do that, I find that x is 2. So remember, this is just the x-intercept. I put y equals 0 into the equation. So my coordinate is 2, 0. So if I plot that, x-intercept goes on the x-axis. And so I have one of my 2 points that I need in order to graph it. So next, let's look at our y-intercept. So for a y-intercept, my x will be 0. So I'm going to replace the x with a 0. So if I'm thinking algebraically, that's 8 times 0 plus 4y equals 16. If I'm thinking in terms of the cover-up method, anytime that I multiply by 0, it's going to go away. So I'm left with 4y equals 16. So if I have 4y equals 16, I can divide both sides by 4. And then I can look at what I have left. So y equals 4 here. So remember, I already have an x value because I let x equal 0. So this coordinate is 0, 4. So that's on my y-axis. My y-intercept is at 4. So once I have those 2 points, I can graph my line through the 2 points. So for your turn, I want you to replicate this x-intercept, y-intercept thing, either using the algebraic method showing plugging in the 0, or by using the cover-up method. So you have 2 problems on your turn. Pause the video and work through those, and then come back to see if you got them correct. On the first your turn, let's look at our x-intercept first. So for my x-intercept, I am going to cover up my y, or plug in 0. So whenever I plug in 0 for my y, it's going to go away, and I end up with, this one's easy because there's no coefficient. This one just says x equals -4. So that's my x-intercept. It's on my x-axis. For my y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 where the x was. So whenever I do that, I'm going to cover up that x and see what I have left. So for my y-intercept, I have -2 times y equals -4. This one does have a coefficient, so I'm going to divide by -2. And I find that y equals 2. So for this one, this is my y-intercept. It goes on my y-axis. Y is 2. Once I have those, I can draw my line. So my line is going to go through those 2 points. There is the graph of my linear equation. On the second one, I'm going to rewrite it. So for my x-intercept, I plug in 0 for y. That makes this go away. And I have 5x equals 15. So now I can divide both sides by 5, and I find x equals 3. So that's my x-intercept. It goes on my x-axis. Next, I'm going to go back and find my y-intercept. So for my y-intercept, I'm going to rewrite the equation. And then I'm going to plug in 0 for the x. So I'm going to take out the x, and I have 3y equals 15. So I can divide by 3 on both sides, and I get that y equals 5. So I'm going to plot y equals 5. So that's y-intercept. It goes on the y-axis. Then I have my 2 points so that I can draw my line. So that is how you can find your graph from standard form. So even though it's not pretty, we can figure out what our graph is.